Welcome back to the shop, guys. Today we've got not one, but two electric water pump jobs, hopefully, if all goes well. Both E82s, both obviously rear-wheel drive, that's the only way they come, but we've got an N52 B30 and an N54 B30. And, hi Casey. And we have the water pump sets here. So, you guys have seen these online, you're probably trying to figure out which pump you need. From this line over, turbo car, so N54 and N55. From this line over, not including the coffee or the tools, is N52 or N51, so the NA cars. Differences are water pump. This is a pierburg, all aluminum water pump, and they use one-time use yield aluminum bolts. And there is a Continental VDO pump for the turbo cars with a plastic housing, which is terrible. And they use steel bolts, which they say are one-time use, but they're not. I'm still going to replace them and put Loctite on them. But thermostats are the same, car to car. These are Whaler units. They're OE. And that's well worth spending the money on because the aftermarkets don't fit for shit. The job itself, the tools I know for sure we need a hook pick to take off the quick release radiator hose connects on the thermostat. You're going to need a smattering of extensions, quarter or 3/8, depending on what you want to do. You're going to need them for your Torx, E-Torx, what is this? E12, that's going to be for your main water pump bolts. You're going to need a 7mm or a standard for your hose clamps. There's a bunch of them in there, and they're going to be facing the wrong way if this is the first water pump for your car. Thanks, BMW. 8mm for your underbody plastics, and you're going to need a 10mm, possibly a 13 as well for just removal of general bracketry and sway bar stuff. So the first step we're going to be doing, and we're starting with the NA car because why not, is vent the cooling system pressure. Ideally, you want to wait until the car has cooled off to do this job, but we're going to not do that. So I'm going to slowly start cracking the bleed screw. Oh shoot, she's got a lot of pressure in her. This is super sketchy. So I'm going to crack it just enough where it can let the air pressure out of the system. Maybe let it sit for a couple of minutes, then take the cap off very carefully. If your engine's warm, I recommend you wait until it cools. If you're going to do it with a hot system, put a big towel over the top of this cap just in case it does rupture, because you don't want 200-degree coolant all over you or in your eyeballs. So I'm going to let that sit for a second, come back once it's vented pressure, and then we're going to put the car up in the air, and we'll start going on the underbody plastics. Anyway, the cap is off, the system pressure is bled down. Just leave the bleed screw out a fair bit. Once the cap's off, you're not going to have any pressure, but this is going to be important for when you drain the coolant out bottom side, just so you don't have quite as high a risk of getting a face full or an eye full. Next step, I'm just going to throw this thing up in the air, put the bridge jack under it, and show you kind of what we got to take off to get at the important bits. So the car is up in the air. First step for us is going to be taking off the forward of the two underbody protection plates, aerodynamics. It's just a series of 8mm fasteners along the perimeter. We're going to be leaving the one for the transmission on the car. But just make sure you get all of them before you start forcing anything. This is a rare case where I'm not actually going to work on the car, since this isn't my car. In case he actually wants to work on it, I'm going to have her pull it off now. And then once she's done that, we'll take a look inside, and I'll show you what to disconnect next. Well, we have the under panel off, so looking at the bottom of the car. The next step, assuming your car is actually in pretty good shape like this one, and it still has the lower plastic shroud piece, that's good news. There are two more 8mm here and here. Be careful when you drop them, because you are going to drop these two aluminum brackets that hold up part of the under tray when that happens. This black plastic piece will pull out toward the back of the car and drop down. It's an air duct piece helping cooling, so do make sure you save it and put it back in. The next step for us is going to be another 10mm here. If you have an impact, you might be able to get away without putting a 19 or a 21. I forget which size is which on these cars. On this little isolator, just make sure you don't twist it off, because they're kind of expensive and they do matter. Once you've done that, there are two 13mm nuts on the sway bar bushing brackets on both sides. Zip those off, let the sway bar hang down, and then we'll have a better unobstructed view of the water pump, which you can see right there, and the thermostat eventually, which is on top of it. So I'm going to have Casey start ripping those 8mm out, and we'll get all this stuff out of the way and come back to it. So we have the sway bar dropped down, just sitting on the tie rod ends, perfectly fine to do. I have the cooler line dropped down and just sitting out of the way. Our next steps are going to be taking the electrical connectors off. You have one connector on your map thermostat. You're going to want to get your little pick tool for this one. There's a little tab right in the middle there. We're going to lift up on and then pull the electrical plug out. And then the bigger one up here, there's just a tab right here that you push in just like that and pull off. Careful not to ruin it. These connectors are very expensive and they're kind of brittle. You do not have to remove the ground wire. That can stay. Once you've done that, you can zip these two 10mm out that hold the thermostat to the water pump, and then you can get your E12 and start on the two aluminum bolts down there. And oh man, I can't even show you yet, but there is one on the top you're going to have to get to with many extensions. And I'm actually going to pull out this plastic piece I didn't know if we had to take out. It's really tough to see, but anyway, you're going to have to basically rely on feel to get to the top bolt, which is kind of back right up above there. I'd recommend a 3/8 drive socket, a U-joint, and a bunch of extensions, and a lot of patience. Make sure you're well seated on that bolt before you start torquing it off, because it's aluminum, and if you break it off, you are proper hoopa-jooped. So we're going to go on those electrical plugs, the 10 mils, and start on these aluminum bolts. But once you've got that done, there are two hose clamps on the actual water pump, which are these two. There's an outlet here and an inlet here. Take your 7mm and start draining the coolant out of that once you're ready. It's going to take a while. There's about 2 gallons of coolant in the system. But once all the bolts are out of it, both those hoses are off, you will be able to wiggle the water pump out of there. On a rear-wheel drive car, it's actually not too bad. So I'll kind of show you the process as I can, but that's the gist of what we're doing next. So there we are. That upper really sucks to get to. You can see in the center of the screen where it bolts through. You pretty much do it by feel. What I did was my E12 3/8 U-joint, and then I came down through here with 2 long extensions, and we're looking good. So I'm happy about that. Next up for us is going to be taking the outlet and inlet hose clamps off really carefully. Start draining the coolant. I'd grab a bucket. Helps if you have another pair of hands. Today I'm going to be the other pair of hands while Casey pulls these off. But loosen those up, leave them on the hoses, and drain the entire system out. Once you've done that, be careful. Once you've taken those hose clamps off and the hose is off, that water pump is free balling in there. So she might fall out, and just be careful. So we're going to do that, and then I'll show you the thermostat on top of that once the water pump is out. There is our thermostat with the water pump out. There are 2 quick release hoses. There's a big one on your left there. There's a smaller one up and behind it. Just up here, sorry, by my finger. You can see it a little better down there, potentially. So on those, there's a metal bar on them. You're going to want to get your little hook pick underneath. Sorry about the focus. This thing really isn't digging being under the car. There's a metal bar right here, and you're going to slip the hook pick in right there, lift that metal bar up and out. Once that's happened, you're going to pry, wiggle, and tug on this thing until it comes off. The hose here, go ahead and leave on, because that one's connected to the water pump. Then there's a little quick disconnect one on the back that you're going to have to deal with as well with the hook pick. And I believe there is a 4th hose as well with a conventional hose clamp back there too. So you might need a smaller screwdriver. Again, it's super hard to film all this stuff. Oops.
But this is, you could do this job just as well as a blind person as you could with sight, just because everything is relying on feel. But you're looking for 2 conventional worm style hose clamps, and you're looking for 2 quick disconnects. Again, I highly recommend you leave the water pump hose on there, because you're going to need a reference angle for when you're transferring this over outside of the car. So we're going to go ahead and rip that thing out right now. Then we'll look at everything on the bench, and should be pretty smooth sailing from here on out.
So here we have our new water pump, old water pump, old thermostat, new thermostat, floor cleany person. So the next step here is going to be transferring this hose in this orientation to this thermostat. It's pretty easy to do. Just be careful and be cognizant of the orientation when you're putting it back in, because the thermostat bolts to the water pump, and this is a fixed orientation between the 2 components. It's not very easy to tighten this one on the car, so I prefer doing this outside of the car. Right now, I'm just going to grab my 6mm, take this clamp off, get the hose nice and loose, and then once that's moving around, swap it over, tighten it down, and we will start reconnecting the new thermostat in the car, followed by the new water pump in the car, followed by the new aluminum bolts, and then the fill and bleed procedure, which is pretty snazzy. Make sure you're using the correct BMW blue coolant. You can get it from the dealership in a gray jug, otherwise you can get this Roway blue stuff from Worldpac or a bunch of other companies, so it's the same stuff. Pentafrost also works. Thank you. So yeah, I'm going to transfer that hose over right now, and then we'll start throwing this new thermostat in the car.
So we've got our water pump back in, we've got the thermostat back in, every clamp is tightened down, the electrical's back, we transferred over this little wiring loom connector holder, map thermostat's plugged in, main power for the pump is plugged in, up in here. All the clamps are back on. We've got the power steering cooler back on. We're not going to bolt up the sway bar yet, and we're not going to put up the plastic pieces yet. I'm going to go back down with the car, do the fill and bleed procedure, which I'll go over with you guys. Make sure there's no leaks, and then we'll come back down under here, button it up, and this thing will be good to go. In theory, we'll see. I'm optimistic. So right now we're filling the coolant through the main reservoir opening. We have the bleed screw loosened to vent air pressure while we fill the system. Adding concentrate right now, we'll be topping up with plain water. Distilled water is recommended, but it really doesn't make that big a difference. Just keep topping until you see coolant come out of the bleed screw. This should take about 1.5 to 2 gallons total, so we'll see. Once we've filled all the way until the coolant is coming out of the bleed screw, we'll put the screw back in, tighten it down, put the cap back on, and then we'll get inside the car to do the bleed procedure. Okay, so we're going to bleed now. The procedure is in a manual car, pop her in neutral, and then without your foot on the brake or the clutch, hit the ignition. Yep, that's good. Now turn the heater all the way to the maximum temperature and the lowest fan speed on both sides, and then fully depress the accelerator pedal for 15 seconds. And now we wait. Yep, you can get out if you want. It's bleeding. Otherwise, you can ride it out in there. So you can hear the pump cycling coolant. That's a good sign, especially because we don't hear a godly torrent of hellfire raining onto the ground. It means we did something right. So what this is going to do over the next 2 minutes is cycle the pump up and down in speed to simulate a drive cycle to bleed air pockets out of the system. What I'm going to do after the cycle is finished is just turn off the ignition, crack the bleed screw, open the reservoir, check the level. If the level looks good, which it almost always does after filling it this way,
Just gonna tighten her back down, pop the sway bar back on, pop that under plastic back on, and this car is good to go for 80K, at least as far as cooling system is concerned. What a goof. Anyway, it's looking good so far. We don't see any leaks underneath. The pump sounds nice and healthy. I'm always surprised at how quiet the NA pumps are. When we do the 1M and we bleed that, you're gonna be amazed at how loud that stupid thing is. And just like that, water pump job 1 is donezo. No leaks, no problems, no need for a top off. She's good to go. I drop the bridge jack down, drop the lift, and we'll swap her out for the 1M. Well, we didn't do any video on the 1M pump just because it's basically the same process, but it's all installed. No leaks, back together, ready to set down. On to greater things. Old pumps, old thermostats. Gross. Pretty colors.